Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel where narratives transcend mere telling. They resonate deeply. If your spirit aligns with empathy, justice, and truth, you've found your community. It's often said that time mends all wounds. But what if the hurt persists, re-emerging in subtle daily instances that often go unnoticed by most? Prejudice isn't always overt. It doesn't always manifest as blazing symbols or hateful epithets. Sometimes, it subtly surfaces through silence, avoidance, and missed opportunities. Some might ponder, haven't things improved? Why revisit the topic of bias? Others might counter, precisely because it's now concealed, it poses a greater threat than ever. Where do you stand on this? Before we delve into the complete narrative, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement empowers us to unveil more authentic voices, unvarnished truths, and candid dialogues. Every interaction matters and every story holds significance. Now let's commence. His sole desire was to rest and await his train. Yet, a single glance from the officer altered everything. Not due to any wrongdoing on his part but simply because of who he was. What transpired next reverberated far beyond that train station bench. Union Station consistently carried the scent of roasted peanuts, an old saying by Marble Herald. Today it was permeated with uninvited memories. The rain outside fell softly, almost reflectively, the kind that gently tapped upon Union Station's grand glass dome in Washington, D.C. Inside, the hum of announcements and footsteps intertwined with the steady rustle of newspapers and polite coughs. People flowed in and out, commuters, tourists, executives in tailored suits with sleek luggage. Amidst them sat Harold Green, 76 years old, in a wool coat with faded edges. He held a ticket in one hand and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper in the other. He wasn't obstructing anyone. His train was still an hour away. All he wished for was to rest his knees and observe the station's ebb and flow. But then came the gaze. From across the atrium, a young security officer in a dark blue uniform fixated on him. Not because Harold was acting suspiciously. He wasn't begging, wasn't asleep, wasn't disrupting the tranquility. But there was something in that officer's demeanor. A pause, a tightening of the jaw, a slight tilt of the head, as if Harold's presence in that particular seat was somehow problematic. Harold sensed it. He always did. It wasn't unfamiliar. He had grown up during segregation. He recalled benches marked whites only. He remembered the staircases and diners, the hushed tones on buses. And though the overt signs had long vanished, sometimes the eyes still conveyed the same message. The officer approached. "Sir," he stated politely but with a practiced firmness. "Are you awaiting someone?" Harold raised an eyebrow, his ticket still held between two fingers. "Waiting for a train." The officer nodded slowly, his gaze sweeping over the man's coat, his shoes, then settling back on his worn, dignified face. "May I inspect your ticket?" Harold didn't falter. "You may. Though I don't recall everyone here needing to display one merely to sit." There was no anger in his voice, just a profound calm like the eye of a storm. The officer hesitated but accepted the ticket. "Just a routine check, sir." Harold chuckled softly, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. It always is. He knew the routine. Had witnessed it often enough. But this time it was happening to him yet again. As the officer scrutinized the ticket, a fully paid train departing in 58 minutes, Harold's gaze remained steady. He looked not at the uniform but at the young man within it. "What's your name, son?" he inquired. The officer blinked, taken aback. "Peterson? Officer Luke Peterson." "Well, Officer Peterson," Harold gently said, retrieving his ticket. "I've been traversing this station for 40 years. Never encountered an issue before, but perhaps today I appear to be one." Peterson shifted. "That's not, sir. It's not personal. We're instructed to watch for loitering." "Loitering?" Harold repeated the word, tasting it like something bitter. "And how do you distinguish between someone loitering and someone simply waiting?" It was a question that resonated beyond the confines of the room. Peterson offered no reply. He didn't need to. Across the atrium others observed. A woman lowered her coffee cup. A man engrossed in his phone paused. Even the janitor with his mop slowed his pace, eyes darting. Harold sighed, not from anger but from exhaustion. Not from the walk to the station but from the cumulative years of silent moments like this. The quiet scrutinies, the subtle daily judgments. Peterson retreated. "You're permitted to stay, sir." "My apologies." Harold nodded. "I understand you're performing your duty. I merely wonder when your duty will evolve." The officer hesitated again, then turned and walked away. Harold watched him depart, not with disdain, but with a poignant recognition. The young man was acting as the system had conditioned him to, and Harold had long since learned not to conflate the uniform with the individual. He bit into his sandwich. Moments passed. The station continued its rhythm, but the energy around him had subtly shifted. Not dramatically, just perceptibly. A few seats away, a middle-aged woman offered a faint smile. Harold reciprocated. That was the essence of prejudice. It didn't always erupt. Sometimes it merely lingered a second too long, posed one extra question, or demanded proof when none was necessary. But Harold hadn't arrived seeking conflict. He had come to board a train. Long before Officer Peterson ever donned a badge, Harold Green had already navigated a world designed to exclude him. Yet sometimes the past doesn't merely knock. It settles beside you, silent and profound, awaiting recollection. The clock above track 7 ticked slowly, and the gentle voice of the announcer resonated through Union Station, signaling boarding for a train Harold still had ample time to await. He adjusted himself slightly in his seat, feeling the subtle stiffness in his knees. But it wasn't age that caused his restlessness. Now it was memory. Because when Officer Peterson had departed earlier, something old stirred within him. He surveyed the grand hall, its polished stone, the Art Deco design still exuding dignity even after decades. But beneath its beauty, Harold remembered another time. This very station in 1963. He had been 16, anxious, dressed in a pressed shirt his mother had ironed the night before, and terrified because he was about to travel to Mississippi, joining a group of volunteers for what they termed Freedom Summer. Back then he had traversed this same space and was explicitly, publicly informed he couldn't occupy the front waiting area. A porter had gestured him toward a bench near the far wall by the restrooms. "For colored travelers," the man had said with a glance so routine it conveyed no malice, merely habit. Harold hadn't argued. He knew better. But the sting of that moment never dissipated. And now, all these years later, with civil rights legislation enacted, a black president having served and countless panels and pledges made, here he was again being asked to validate his right to belong. He sighed and slowly rose, stretching slightly. His coat parted, revealing a small, almost imperceptible bronze pin on his lapel. But it held significance. The symbol of the Freedom Riders, bestowed upon him at their 50th anniversary reunion. He wore it not for attention but for grounding, a private reminder to himself. You've weathered storms. This is merely a sprinkle. As he approached the coffee stand, someone caught his eye. A young woman, likely in her late 20s, with a police academy logo on her backpack. She was seated opposite an older white woman, perhaps her grandmother. They spoke softly, the younger one gesturing with evident frustration. "But Nana, you can't assume people are dangerous just because." Her voice tightened. She met Harold's gaze mid-sentence, then immediately averted hers. He offered her a nod, not judgmental, just understanding. That was the thing. He had ceased being angry years ago, but he never stopped observing. Back at his bench, Harold found someone seated beside his coat. It was Peterson, the officer. Harold paused, not from fear but from curiosity. "Mind if I sit for a moment?" Peterson asked. Harold raised an eyebrow. "You're already here, aren't you?" Peterson offered a tight smile. "I wanted to apologize again. I know how that appeared." Harold remained silent. He let the quiet linger. "It's not an excuse," Peterson added, "but they emphasize it in training. Watch for anything out of place. Sometimes that training, I suppose, doesn't always account for common sense or respect." Harold slowly sat, placing his coffee down. "Have you ever heard of The Green Book, son?" he inquired. Peterson looked perplexed. "The movie?" Harold smiled faintly. Before the movie, it was a survival guide. Black individuals used it from the 40s through the 60s. It indicated which gas stations, hotels, and restaurants were safe. Union Station wasn't in it. Not back then. Peterson blinked. "I wasn't aware of that." "No reason you should be," Harold said gently. "But when you stopped me earlier, I wasn't angry with you. I was weary for the 16-year-old version of myself who once sat in this station, wondering why simply existing felt so offensive. Peterson looked down. I wasn't trained to consider such things. Then it's time someone initiated that training, Harold retorted. Because if you only perceive problems in people who resemble me, you'll overlook the true hazards walking right past you. For a moment the young officer remained silent. Then he asked, why did you come today? Not just for the train. Why here now? Harold looked at him directly. Because my grandson is graduating in Atlanta, the first in our family to earn a doctorate. He requested my presence and I wasn't going to allow a minor historical flashback to make me miss that. Peterson straightened. Congratulations. That's remarkable. It is, Harold said quietly. And that's why I'm still sitting here. Not because of how I was treated but because I understand why I still need to be present. Just then the overhead speaker announced boarding for train 314 to Atlanta. Harold rose, gathering his coat. He paused, looking down at the young man in uniform. Do you ever contemplate the kind of world you're helping to build, Officer Peterson? The young man nodded slowly. More today than ever before. Then strive for better tomorrow, Harold said, than you did today. That's all any of us can ask. He didn't await a response. He walked toward his gate with quiet dignity, his back straight, his pin gleaming faintly in the overhead light. As he surrendered his ticket he felt a small burden lift, not from forgiveness but from having voiced what needed to be said. And as he stepped onto the train, past rows of strangers and announcements in silence, he knew the past hadn't vanished. It had merely found a seat beside him. But now he wasn't allowing it to dictate. Some expressions aren't greetings, they are defenses. And when the smoke behind them dissipates, you discern what the world endeavored to conceal: pain, pride, and the quiet resilience of those who have endured more than anyone will ever comprehend. The rhythmic clang of the train echoed like a steady pulse as it glided along the tracks. Harold Green sat by the window, the world outside blurring into shades of green and gold. He wasn't observing the scenery. He was scrutinizing expressions, not on a page but on the faces of those opposite him. An elderly woman offered a polite nod. A teenager swayed his head to music. And near the dining car entrance, a white man in a tailored blazer cast a gaze that lingered a little too long. Harold responded with a smile, calm, gentle, a well-practiced smile, not one that invited but one that diffused. He had dedicated a lifetime to perfecting that smile. From his boyhood, navigating school hallways where he was unwelcome, to later boardrooms where his expertise was questioned, his smile had achieved what anger could not. It had afforded him space, time, safety. Yet each time he employed it, a small fragment of truth remained unsaid. He sipped from a paper cup of tea and reflected on his grandson. Elijah would likely be pacing backstage presently, rehearsing his speech, adjusting his robe collar. Harold could almost hear him. Granddad, I want you right there in the front row. You're the reason I'm walking this stage. He smiled again, but this time it faltered slightly, for beneath the smile lay smoke. Smoke from memories he hadn't articulated in years. Not because they were buried but because they had never truly extinguished. They smoldered quietly, awaiting the opportune moment to rekindle. The conductor passed by, offering a kind inquiry. Everything satisfactory here, Sir Harold? He nodded. Everything's fine. But it wasn't, not entirely. A few seats behind him someone laughed too boisterously. Then came the words, half whispered, half daring, look at him. Probably got bumped up from coach. You know how it is. It wasn't spoken directly. That was the contemporary mode of operation. Indirect prejudice veiled in plausible deniability. Cowardice masquerading as commentary. Harold slowly turned his head. Not in confrontation but simply in observation. He had been called worse. But what pierced deeper wasn't the remark. It was the absence of reaction. No one corrected it. No one challenged it. Just the usual rustle of newspapers. The polite silence that permitted discomfort to settle in unnoticed. Across the aisle, a young girl no older than 10 gave Harold a curious look. She had a tablet on her lap, cartoons flickering across the screen. Her gaze was innocent, unconditioned. She smiled at him and Harold once again smiled back. This time genuine warmth emanated from it. Later, as the train pulled into Charlotte for a scheduled stop, a minor stir arose in the dining car. A woman, black, elderly, sharp-eyed, was conversing with a staff member. Her voice was calm but resolute. You stated there was a seat and now suddenly there isn't. I've been standing here for 15 minutes. Harold had not intended to intervene. He had resolved, especially after the airport incident, not to expend energy rectifying what was not his to mend. But something in the woman's tone, a weary dignity, beckoned him. He stood and gently approached. Ma'am, you're welcome to sit with me if you wish. There's space. She looked at him, then back at the attendant. Is that acceptable? The staff member hesitated. Of course. The woman sat. Thank you. Some things never change, do they? Harold nodded. And some things change because we don't allow them to remain static. They sat in silence for a moment. You remind me of someone, she said. My brother was in Selma, walked the bridge. I was in Mississippi, Harold replied. She smiled. And this time it was authentic. Two survivors sharing more than just physical space. Do you ever grow weary? She asked quietly. All the time, Harold said. But I'm still here. He returned to his seat just before the train resumed its journey, his tea now cold, his body a little heavier, and then an unexpected presence. Officer Peterson, the young man from Union Station. Clean-shaven, in civilian attire, standing in the aisle. Harold blinked. Didn't expect to see you again. I caught the next train out, Peterson said. I wanted to apologize in person again, but more than that, I wanted to listen. Harold observed him. You know, he said slowly, when I was your age we used to say, talk is cheap. But what I've learned is that sometimes talk is all we have before action catches up. Peterson sat across from him respectfully. I watched your interview on that museum site, the Oral History Archive. I didn't know who you were when I questioned you. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with dignity. I know, Peterson said. I'm striving to be better than the badge alone permits me to be. Harold leaned back. Then don't wield it like a shield. Carry it like a mirror. The train swayed as it traversed a stretch of pine-lined countryside. The sun angled differently now later in the day. Shadows lengthened. Peterson stood, offered his hand. Thank you for not dismantling me when you had every right to. Harold took it. You're still young. I've dismantled enough to know building endures longer. As Peterson walked away, Harold permitted himself a long exhalation. The smoke still lingered behind his smile, but it no longer suffocated. Not entirely. And as the train hummed toward its next destination, Harold Green sat alone, his thoughts filled with faces past and future. The girl with the tablet, the woman from the dining car, his grandson awaiting in Atlanta. They were the impetus for his continued presence. And the reason his smile, though etched with smoke, still radiated light. Hook Moja Part 4. It's never merely about the seating. It's about who is offered a place, who is expected to stand, and what that intervening silence truly conveys about the world we have constructed. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as the train entered Georgia. Atlanta shimmered on the horizon, a cityscape of glass and steel reaching skyward as if proving its stature. Inside the cabin, Harold Green adjusted his tie and checked the time. Less than an hour remaining. He was early for Elijah's graduation. But time had never been a luxury he took lightly. Too many delays. Too many instances where history had taught him that being early wasn't a privilege. It was a survival tactic. You arrived promptly. You created space. You afforded no one reason to question your belonging. A young couple boarded at the final stop, white, refined, dressed as if bound for a high-end brunch rather than a train journey. The woman had a designer scarf impeccably draped around her neck. The man wore a tailored blazer, crisp jeans. They glanced at their ticket, then up the aisle, then at Harold. Their seats were beside him. Of course they hesitated. She leaned toward him and whispered, "Perhaps we can request to be moved." Not so quiet after all. Harold didn't flinch. He offered that same familiar smile, but internally something tightened. He had hoped this journey might be different. The conductor returned minutes later. "Excuse me, sir. May I see your boarding pass one more time?" Harold had already displayed it twice, but he handed it over anyway with quiet dignity. The conductor scanned it, nodded, and offered a perfunctory, "All good," before departing. The couple sat, stiff and polite. They didn't look at Harold again. He didn't need them to. The silence spoke volumes. Further up the car, a woman stood holding an infant. The baby squirmed restlessly. There were vacant seats nearby, only 2 rows ahead, but no one offered. People feigned obliviousness. Eyes remained fixed on phones, windows, magazines. Harold observed. Then he rose. He walked forward and offered his seat with a simple, "You'll be more comfortable here." She blinked in surprise. Then, "That's very kind of you. But are you certain?" He nodded. "Absolutely." As she settled, cradling her baby, Harold moved to the aisle. No one else stirred. No one adjusted, so he stood. The train lurched slightly as it accelerated, and Harold reached for the overhead rail. A faint ache pulsed in his knees. Age, arthritis, memory. He smiled faintly through the discomfort. That's when it occurred. A voice rang out, one he recognized. "Granddad." Elijah. He stood near the cabin door in full graduation regalia. Cap, gown, cords, bright eyes, and a stunned expression. "What are you doing standing?" Harold chuckled. "Giving my seat to someone who needed it more." Elijah didn't laugh. He frowned. He surveyed the train car, scanning the seated passengers, some now shifting awkwardly. The baby cooed softly in the distance. Elijah turned to the couple in Harold's original row. "There are 2 seats there. Neither of you thought to offer one." They remained silent. "No, of course not," Elijah muttered. "Granddad, come on. You're with me." He led Harold to the front of the car, to a section marked reserved. Apparently, his university had arranged seating for special guests, faculty speakers, alumni. Elijah had pulled some strings. "You didn't have to do that," Harold said quietly. "I wanted to," Elijah replied. "You did more for me than any scholarship ever could." They sat for a moment. Neither spoke. The weight of the exchange still lingered. "I didn't want to create a scene," Harold finally said. "You didn't," Elijah countered. "The scene created itself." He leaned in closer. "You know, in my speech today I wrote a line that reminded me of you. I said, justice doesn't always arrive with applause. It arrives with clarity. With someone who notices when no seat is offered and still chooses to stand." Harold's throat tightened. Elijah smiled. "I didn't even realize I was describing you until just now." From behind them, a train staff member approached. "Mr. Green, we're terribly sorry. We've arranged for you to sit in the front lounge until arrival. There's a refreshment cart as well." Harold gently shook his head. "Thank you, but I'm content right here." The attendant paused. "If there's anything else we can do." Harold looked at Elijah. "You already did." The man nodded and left. Elijah pulled out his phone. "Social media is already abuzz. Someone filmed that moment with the woman and the baby. Said, 'This is what leadership looks like.'" Harold chuckled. "If only they knew I was merely trying to stretch my legs." "You know that's untrue." The city drew closer outside the window. Tall buildings, old churches, wide roads, history and progress juxtaposed. "Do you think it'll ever be different?" Elijah asked. "That someone like you won't have to keep standing just to prove you're allowed to sit?" Harold exhaled. "I believe it'll be different when enough of us cease pretending we don't perceive what's occurring." The train made its final approach. The announcer welcomed them to Atlanta. And in that moment, amidst the quiet hum of a decelerating engine, the hush of passengers gathering their belongings, the ordinary sounds of travel, something extraordinary had transpired. A man relinquished a seat, a child restored it, and a future watched, poised to carry that narrative forward. Sometimes the most impactful transformations arrive without sirens or applause, just 2 feet alighting from a train and a name finally uttered with reverence. The train eased into the station with a prolonged, sighing halt. The brakes hissed. The doors unlocked with a soft beep. People stood, stretched, shuffled bags down from the overhead racks. Phones illuminated like fireflies, buzzing with texts and calls. "We're here." But Harold Green didn't move immediately. He remained still, hands folded over his cane as the crowd flowed around him like a river parting at a stone. He wasn't attempting to make a statement. He simply desired to absorb the moment, the silence, the atmospheric shift. Beside him, Elijah was already on his feet, holding his grandfather's coat with quiet respect. "Ready?" he asked. Harold looked out the window. "Been ready a long time. Just didn't know what I was waiting for." They stepped onto the platform together. It wasn't loud. No banners, no cameras, no procession. But something in the stillness felt ceremonial. Elijah's classmates waited near the escalator, some waving, others embracing family. Professors in crisp suits gathered in small circles. School officials adjusted earpieces and clipboards. The entire station hummed with the soft commotion of a significant occasion. But when Harold stepped off the train, the energy near the tracks shifted. A few people paused mid-conversation. A conductor tipped his hat. A woman, one of the train attendants, offered a brief, solemn nod. No one said much, but eyes followed Harold's slow, deliberate steps. His presence was a kind of punctuation mark, quietly weighted with meaning. At the base of the escalator stood a man in a slate-gray suit holding a sign that read, "Honored Guests, Emory School of Law." Elijah waved him over. "That's us." The man stepped forward quickly, looking first at Elijah, then at Harold. "Mr. Green," he said, not with mere formality but with something akin to reverence. "We've arranged for a transport cart to take you directly to the auditorium. The ceremony begins in less than 30 minutes. "I can walk," Harold said. "I know," the man replied gently. "But you don't have to." It was a small detail, but Harold noticed it. The tone, the choice. Not an offer born of pity, not an assumption of frailty, but a simple, dignified gesture. So he accepted. They rode slowly past clusters of arriving guests. A few waved. One man, white in his mid-50s, mouthed the words, "I saw what you did," and then lowered his gaze. Harold said nothing. He had nothing left to prove. When they reached the auditorium, Elijah guided his grandfather through the special entrance reserved for honorees and keynote guests. They passed a wall of portraits, judges, professors, benefactors, and Harold paused in front of one in particular, a stern white man from the 1950s framed in oak. "Dean L. Straude," Elijah read from the plaque. "Led the school during desegregation. Famously fought to keep it elite." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Funny," he murmured. "He probably wouldn't have allowed me to mop these floors, let alone walk into the front row." "And now," Elijah said, "you're sitting 2 seats from the university president." They moved into the hall. It was packed. Guests murmured and laughed. But when Harold entered, a ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. Some had seen the video clip of him relinquishing his seat. Others had read the article Elijah's classmate posted online. The man who sat when no one else stood. The dean, young, biracial, sharp-eyed, rose from her seat and offered Harold a handshake. "It's an honor," she said. "And long overdue." Harold smiled. "I've had my share of long waits." The ceremony commenced. Elijah's name was called near the end. He walked across the stage not merely as a graduate, but as a symbol, one linked not to a perfect journey but to a resilient lineage. He accepted his diploma, turned to face the crowd, and spoke into the microphone. "I dedicate this moment to the man who taught me that dignity stands taller than power. My grandfather, Harold Green." A standing ovation followed. Not forced, not performative, genuine. Afterward, as people exited the hall one by one, they approached Harold not with pity but with respect. A judge shook his hand. A professor requested a photo. A mother whispered, "Thank you. My son saw what you did. It made him ask me questions I didn't know how to answer, but I'm glad he asked." Harold gave each one the same quiet nod. That evening at the hotel, Elijah and Harold sat on the rooftop, overlooking Atlanta's luminous expanse. Planes twinkled across the twilight sky. "You know," Elijah said, "I used to think you were too reserved." "I still am," Harold replied with a smirk. "But now I comprehend," Elijah said. "You weren't being quiet. You were being observant, measured." Harold took a long sip of his tea. "I've had a lifetime to learn when to speak," he said, "and when to allow silence to convey the message." They sat like that for a while. No need for grand displays, no loud declarations, just a city breathing, a legacy settling into place, and a quiet arrival more potent than any clamor could ever be. In a world fixated on velocity, volume, and visibility, the narrative of Harold Green serves as a reminder of a more subtle, enduring kind of fortitude, one rooted in dignity, patience, and presence. There were no elaborate speeches when Harold relinquished his seat on that train. No demands, no camera-ready protests, just an elderly black man rising from a position he had rightfully claimed, so someone else, someone younger, less weathered, less scarred, could sit. But that simple act sent ripples. It wasn't merely a gesture of benevolence. It was a reminder of the burdens many silently bear, and the courage it takes to maintain composure in the face of systemic presumptions. It was a refusal to permit others to define his worth, not through tone, glances, or policies cloaked in politeness. Harold did not engage in anger that day. He did not dispute with the train staff. He did not demand acknowledgement or even respect. What he did was far more disarming. He offered grace, and in that grace he exposed the shortcomings of others more clearly than 1,000 arguments ever could. That is the quiet power of presence. Elijah, his grandson, initially perceived it as a minor incident. But as it unfolded and as the truth beneath it emerged, he grasped what generations before him had long understood, that justice doesn't always enter a space with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in how you comport yourself, in the way you refuse to diminish even when the world bids you to sit down or step aside. The wisdom we carry. Several key insights resonate after this story. They are not intricate, but they are profoundly human. First, never underestimate the potency of stillness. In a world conditioned to reward loud voices and incessant motion, stillness is frequently misconstrued as weakness. Yet it is in stillness that you perceive what others miss. It is in stillness that you deliberate your response, not to react impulsively, but to choose the kind of legacy you wish to impart. Second, your presence is your protest. For Harold, entering a train car with a ticket in hand was not merely travel. It was testimony. Occupying a seat he had paid for was not privilege. It was principle. When he stood up, it was not surrender. It was strategy. He knew when to withdraw. And more significantly, he knew that withdrawing did not signify yielding. It signified rising above. Third, transformation doesn't always necessitate a microphone. When Elijah shared the story online, when the law school publicly recognized Harold, when travelers viewed the video of that train journey, what moved them wasn't fury. It was contemplation. The story didn't demand your indignation. It sought your attention. And in seeking, it afforded you the opportunity to see yourself within it, either as the one who stood up or as the silent bystander who did not. A reflection of our current moment. This is not merely a tale about one train, one seat, one family. It is a mirror. It speaks to the subtle ways prejudice still lingers. Who is offered a seat, who is asked for identification, who is afforded the benefit of the doubt. It speaks to the assumptions that permeate our institutions, wrapped in policy and procedure. And it speaks to how change originates not solely from outrage, but from the courage to be visible even when the world desires to overlook you. We often believe justice demands grand gestures. But true justice occurs in ordinary settings. In a waiting room, a train station, a school hallway, a grocery store aisle. It occurs when someone says, "That's not right," or, "I see you," or simply declines to look away. Harold did not set out to be a symbol. Neither did Elijah. But they became one. Not because of what they proclaimed loudly, but because of what they championed and how. To you, the viewer. If you followed this narrative to its conclusion, you have already demonstrated your concern for stories that matter. Stories that not only entertain but challenge and reflect. And so here is my request of you. If you were moved by Harold's dignity, share this story. Allow others to experience what you felt. Let it spread outward. If it prompted you to think differently, discuss it around your dinner table, in your classroom, at your workplace. Let it initiate a dialogue that does not conclude with the credits. If you believe more stories like this deserve to be told, quiet, powerful human stories, then please subscribe to this channel, like, share, and activate the notification bell. Not for statistics but for impact. Your support enables us to continue shedding light where there is too often silence. Because silence is where bias conceals itself, but it is also where resolve is forged. Let this story be more than a fleeting moment. Let it be a reminder that who you are, how you treat others, and what you choose to perceive or not perceive shapes the world we all inhabit. We will continue to share these narratives. We hope you will continue to appear to listen. Thank you for being here.